Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Afisha Beckles. I am the Education USA advisor at the U.S. Embassy in Trinidad and Tobago. It is my pleasure to have you all here with us today for this very informative session. So today's session, titled Undergrad Standardized Testing, What to Expect, will focus on the SAT exam and how it fits into the undergraduate admissions process for US colleges and universities. So before the session begins, I'll just take this opportunity to ask our viewers who have joined us today, where in the US where are you joining us from? And I'll just ask my colleague Marta in the background, if you could please launch the poll so that our guests who are joining can share where they're coming from. Great. So it looks like we have several persons joining from the Caribbean and Central America, and we have a few persons from Canada, Mexico, and from other locations. So again, thanks for joining, and it's really great to see you. Okay, great. So I see that many people are from the Caribbean, Central America, some persons from Mexico, as well as Canada and other locations. So again, thank you for joining us. And for those who may not be familiar with Education USA, Education USA is a network of advising centers from the US Department of State. We are all around the world, and what we do is offer comprehensive and current information about higher education in the United States. And we offer this information to students from around the world for free. And in doing so, we offer sessions just like these, whereby you can find out various types of information about studying in the US and the process of getting you from your home country to an accredited institution in the United States. So to get right into our panel discussion, I'm very pleased to announce our guests who would be on the panel today. So firstly, we have Paul Sanders. Paul Sanders is the Executive Director of International Market Management at CollegeBoard and works to support secondary institutions in Europe, the Middle East and North African region, Africa, and the Americas. He was the Executive Director of the Center for College Readiness at Rice University from 2009 to 2011, and from 2011 to 2017, the Global Health of Recognition at the International Baccalaureate Organization. He holds a BA in Political Science from Texas A&M University and an MLA from St. Edward's University. So thank you so much, Paul, for being here this evening.
I'll take myself off mute. No, my pleasure. And thank you to our EducationUSA colleagues, partners for the opportunity.
Also joining us today is Maria Luisa Garnica. Maria Luisa is the Education USA advisor in Guatemala. She pursued her undergraduate career at a small liberal arts school in Michigan, where she made lifelong friendships and enough snow to last her lifetime. She's very happy and grateful to be part of the Education USA network and loves getting to know new people. Thank you for being here today, Maria Luisa.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.
And last, but definitely not least, we are joined by Andy Navarro Brenes. He is a current Opportunity Fund Scholar from Costa Rica, currently applying to US universities. He's planning to study in a space-related field in the coming years. Andy is an international medalist in physics, and he currently tutors students in STEM and English in his country. Although he loves STEM, he's passionate about astrophotography, music, and design. Thank you, Andy, for being here.
Thanks for having me here. Such a pleasure to join you.
Okay, so now that we have our guest panelists introduced, I'll jump right into our discussion questions. So firstly, I'd like to start with you, Paul. If you can share with us exactly what the SAT is, and if you can give us a bit of an overview of the exam.
Yeah, I'll be glad to. I think firstly, what I'd like to do is just acknowledge the challenges that students, right, at schools have faced during this global pandemic. You know, in the midst of all of this, so many students, so many teachers, coordinators, counselors, principals have just done amazing work, right, to support students in their pursuit of higher education. And it has not been easy. It's been a big challenge. And so I just want to begin by sort of acknowledging those conditions, because part of that, of course, pertains to today's discussion with respect to access to the SAT. So the SAT, this is going to sound quite odd. It was first introduced in 1926. So in 5 years, we'll be celebrating 100 years of the SAT. And at first, it was created really sort of as an assessment to help generate greater access to higher education, much like it's designed today, but also to standardize college admission practices. So today, the SAT is a college entrance examination used by universities for admission decisions. It's multiple choice, it's paper pencil, designed to measure, if you will, a student's readiness on their journey to college. And what it provides to colleges and universities is that common data point that helps them to compare applicants. And so that is the true purpose of the SAT. It consists of two sections. It is the evidence-based writing and reading and writing section, and of course the mathematics section as well. It is 3 hours in length. There's no penalty for guessing, one of the key features of the SAT. Rather, there's no deduction for incorrect answers. We're truly measuring the student's ability to answer questions correctly. And that is true not just with the SAT, but with the SAT suite of assessments as well. So really, you know, it does ask students to more deeply understand a few things that really shown through our research and external research matters most in helping prepare students and connect students to college and to university. And then with all of our SAT suite of assessments, the PSAT, the SAT, they're sort of all tied together with a common content, but also through a common scale that again measures that growth over time as they track towards college readiness. So in terms of the key features, very, very quickly, there's words in context. And again, all of this is available online. So I won't go into too many detail in terms of the key features, but words in context, you know, looking at cross-disciplinary context, looking at informational graphics to draw meaning, to draw implication in terms of what all of this means, what the inference is. There's command of evidence as well, which is critical in demonstrating the ability to synthesize, interpret evidence from a wide range of sources. There's mathematics, which we believe is math that matters most. So here we're talking about problem solving, data analysis. We're talking about, you know, algebra. We're talking about the sort of statistics and then advanced mathematics as well. So there's sort of an escalation in terms of the challenge of the math problems. And then very quickly, there's problems grounded in real world context as well. So students are asked to look at real world directly, indirectly through work performed in college and career. So includes questions, for example, on literature, nonfiction. There's charts and graphs that have to be deciphered, if you will, and then answering questions there in sort of that real world context. There's analysis in science and social science, There's a review of US founding documents as well. By that, we're looking at sort of helping students broaden their approach and understanding of global events. Looking at, for example, the Declaration of Independence, the Bill of Rights, the Federalist Papers, but through the view of what it means to be sort of a global citizen, and interpreting these in such a way as to measure one's sort of civic readiness, if you will, or help to inform centrally duties of citizenship. And so those are some of the key features, if you will, of the SAT, 2 fundamental sections: evidence-based reading and writing, and then the mathematics section.
Great, thank you so much, Paul. That's a really comprehensive view of the exam, and I think it really gives the students here an idea of what they can expect in terms of the breakdown of the exam itself. Now, I know you've given us a lot of information there, but in terms of how the exam is scored, what should students expect to see in a score? What does the score look like? Right.
So in January of this year, we made an announcement that we were eliminating the optional essay section of the SAT that was introduced in 2016. All of this speaks to the evolution of an assessment that needs to obviously reflect the standards in secondary education, as well as meeting the expectations of higher education, and taking in a rigorous assessment like the SAT for purposes of admission. So with the elimination of the writing section, there are the 2 sections, right? Evidence-based reading and writing, the mathematics. Both are scored on a 200 to 800 point scale. So the composite score is a total of 1,600. I used to teach history, so my math is not the best, but I do understand that to be a total of 1,600. And there are essentially different scores, sub-scores and such, but students get 1 total score. From those 2 sections that I mentioned, there are cross-test scores as well, which come from questions on the 2 tests. There are sub-scores, and these are associated, again, with the evidence-based writing and reading section. And then there are 3 that are applied to the math section as well. I know that all sounds a bit complicated, and to be honest, it is. But do go online, go to collegeboard.org, especially for the student page, and what it will give you is a breakdown of how it is that the assessment is assessed and how it is that points are awarded. But the total score, the perfect score, if you will, on the SAT would be 1,600. We have identified, for example, ways in which for students to measure sort of their performance, looking at various benchmarks using a new color-coded system, which is available on their score reports, as it is for students, as it is for schools as well. So you'll see red, you'll see yellow, you'll see green. And essentially what we're doing here is just tracking grade level benchmarks so that students can understand how it is that they're performing tied to these college readiness benchmarks. And then lastly, percentiles as well. So again, helping students understand their scores compared to the performance of other students as well. So you get a composite score, but then students also get some really rich information feedback about how they can improve their performance, areas for potential growth, and how it is that they compared with other students that took the exam as well.
Okay, thanks so much for that. And I really like the idea of students getting some information to see how they compare to other students. I think that's really important, especially when you're looking at what the admission requirements at a specific college or university might be, and a student might get an idea of how well they may fare if they do apply to a specific school as compared to other students. So thank you for that. So my next question is for you, Maria Luisa. Now, as an Education USA advisor, I know you would have students coming to you. They might be asking you about the SAT or another standardized test for college admission. Why should a student consider doing the SAT?
Thank you, Afisha, and thank you, Paul. That was a really useful overview, I think, to kind of land on the land of SAT. I think the first question a student needs to ask themselves is, do I need to take the test? You know, are the options I'm applying to, do they require me to take the test? And once you answer that question, then you can go from there. Because some schools are test optional, and that truly means test optional. And some schools are not. You still, even with the pandemic, you need to find the way to register and take the SAT. So I think the first question that you need to determine is, do I need to take it because they require it? Or do I need to take it? Do I want to take it just to add it to my application as another component of my application? Because it's not only about your score, you know, it's also about other elements in your application, you know, your grades, your recommendation letters, your profile and extracurriculars, your hobbies, the things you love to do, the things you will bring to the student community. So the first conversation is, okay, let's look at your options, let's verify that they ask for it or not, and let's see how you're doing, right? Because maybe it is a test optional school and you're not doing great on your practice tests, so maybe you don't want to send your score if you don't do great. But if it's an optional school, a test optional school, and you do great in your SAT, then it could add to your application, right? So I think that's the first step to determine.
Great, thank you, Maria Luisa. That's an excellent point. A lot of times students think that they have to be worried about the SAT and having to do the exam and getting the perfect score, when oftentimes if they did their research, it may turn out that the SAT might be optional, it might be needed, but at least it's good to know that, you know, the option is oftentimes there to do it or not do it. So that's good to know. Thank you for that. So Andy, I'm turning to you now as a student who actually recently did the SAT. Why did you choose to do the SAT? Was it something that was required for you, or were you like one of those students who wanted to have the option of submitting your SAT scores?
Yeah, surely. Okay, so most of my schools do not require an SAT. Most of them were test optional, right? But I was just trying out if an SAT could potentially give more or stand out in my application, right? So I started trying the SAT on practice tests. So there are many options on the internet, CollegeBoard official practices, and there are even more. So you can get a sense of how well are you doing on the SAT from those practice tests, right? If you do well, then maybe you could try out the SAT to finally show it on your application. One of the reasons I think the SAT was like a good option, it's from its convenience. So, well, at least here in Costa Rica, there are like many dates on which you can take the SAT, different locations. So it's like really convenient to when you want to take it or when you feel prepared. And it's widely accepted to many different institutions. So those are like the main reasons why I took the SAT.
Great. So as Andy stated there, your schools may be test optional, but in his case, he wanted to take the SAT to add to his admissions package, basically. So that's good to know. Thank you so much, Andy. Now, earlier, Paul, I know you alluded to some changes that took place with the SAT earlier this year, specifically the optional essay being removed. Were there any other changes that were done within recent times, especially in the context of COVID-19 and challenges that students might be facing? Any other changes that took place?
Yeah, no, thank you. You know, the global pandemic hit everybody hard, right? I mean, it was so abrupt and so sudden. So in 2020, we had no choice but in March and May to cancel those SAT administrations, which was most unfortunate because, of course, it's in the springtime where seniors in particular are looking to that assessment, right, to send their scores to the universities that they apply to. So CollegeBoard is a non-profit organization with a very large membership made up of colleges and universities in the US and around the world. And so it was important for us to engage with higher education to make sure that there were flexible options, right? For students who couldn't take the test, who couldn't find a test center, where it was not safe and healthy to do so for them, for the proctors, and for everybody else that was involved. So it was really, really hard. So I guess the first change that we had to do is that internationally, we only had 4 administrations of the SAT, 2 in the fall, 2 in the spring. So we immediately in 2020, 2021 added August, which was part of the plan. We added September, October, November for subject tests. There was a December administration, March, May, and then June with subject tests as well. So that was the most important thing that we needed to do, was just expand the number of opportunities a student has to take the test. So for 2021, 2022, there were 5 administrations, 2 we've already had. So August, again in October, there'll be 1 in December, there'll be 1 again in March, and there'll be 1 in May. So that really represents sort of our biggest response, if you will, to the pandemic. For those of you who are not being able to find maybe a test center, your first choice, there's a feature on collegeboard.org where Help Me, I think it's actually called Help Me Find a Test Center. Not very elegant, but it gets the job done. And so when you do that, we will on the back end help identify where there are test centers in your area so that we can pinpoint and hopefully minimize the inconvenience of traveling a greater distance to take the assessment. So really that's been the biggest response, if you will, to the pandemic. And I think later we'll be talking more about higher education as well, test optional. So if I have an opportunity later in today's conversation to talk about test optional trends, practices, what the future holds, I'll reserve those comments at that time.
Okay, great. Yes. So the additional dates that were added, that really, I think, has been a positive for a lot of students, because so many of them at the beginning of the pandemic were hit with this not being able to actually go to the test center, and it was inconvenient, but it's good to know that the College Board has managed to add additional dates, which, as Andy stated earlier, the one reason he looked at the SAT was the convenience and the several options for testing that was available. So that's really good to know. And again, students, you can go to the collegeboard.org website and look at the find a test center, and you'll be able to get information there on additional test centers. So moving on in the discussion a bit more, I wanted to go to you, Maria Louisa, regarding Education USA. So we support students who want to go to the US to study. How do we, or maybe how have you, as an Education USA advisor, support students who are interested in doing the SAT and in terms of their preparation for the exam?
Sure. So as Education USA advisors, our main job is to support you or support a student in their process, right? Share tools, share experiences, and share also learning that we've had ourselves or through our advisees, right? And so Education USA can support you in small things like technical difficulties. Like, for example, I had a student who wasn't able to input their phone number in their profile, and so we figured it out. She was adding a couple extra digits where she didn't have to, or reminding our students to use their full legal names. For example, that is a very important element, especially in Latin America, where we have oftentimes more than just 2 names, and so it can cause confusion. I also like to see our job as advisors as a bridge, because I believe the SAT and standardized testing as such can become kind of a cultural difference, in the sense that in my experience here in Guatemala, we don't necessarily grow up knowing that there's this kind of test and take, practice tests since we're in middle school or, young high school students. And so when we get to having to perform really well in a standardized test that is new to us, I think the becoming familiar with it and having somebody explain that you don't have to be a genius to do well in your SAT. You have to develop your technique. You have to develop your confidence. You have to become familiar with the test, know it inside out, and know yourself within the test and see how you react. Maybe I'm not as good in math as I would like to be, and so I get really nervous. What is my strategy to deal with this when it comes up? Or maybe I'm great with math and I'm not great with words and I get frozen. What is going to be my strategy with that? And so I think working one-on-one with those fears that come up, when you're young and you're excited, it's hard to manage many emotions at the same time. And so as advisors, we're there for our students to hear them out. I think also many advising centers are also hubs for test prep, or our host institutions offer courses for test prep sometimes. And I think that is another resource. Sometimes EducationUSA advising centers offer SAT boot camps. So you should be mindful of social media in your country to see if you can participate in these kinds of resources. And lastly, I think once we're one-on-one with our students, I often like to share those resources that are free. CollegeBoard has a lot of awesome resources. And again, I emphasize the importance of becoming familiar with the test. There is no magic potion that is going to give you an excellent score. You can just become familiar with it and develop your test strategy and your confidence. I think that's really important, right? That will be my answer.
Great, thank you so much. Wise words from one of our EducationUSA advisors. So students, I would encourage you, for those of you who may not be aware, you can visit the EducationUSA website, which is educationusa.state.gov, and you can find an education advising center near you to connect with an education advisor like myself or Maria Luisa, who can point you in the right direction in terms of the SAT resources that are available and guide you in terms of how you can prepare for that exam. So back into the discussion, I would like to ask you, Paul, because Maria Luisa did hint to us that there are resources for students and international students as well who are interested in SAT and preparing. So what resources are available from the College Board for international students?
Yep. When you talk about preparation for the SAT, I'll just wear my parent hat very quickly. So I'm calling you today from Washington, D.C. This is my home. We usually went into an office, but the office has been closed for a year and a half. So this has been the nerve center, if you will, of my work. But my daughter is in the 11th grade. She took the PSAT last Wednesday, October 13th. When we think about, resources, building confidence and sort of taking an examination, getting the feedback, learning from the feedback, the score reports, as Maria was mentioning, becoming familiar, becoming more confident. I, as a parent, and I think my daughter would agree as well, I really feel that if you have the opportunity to take the PSAT, not all students do, but if there's the opportunity, it really is a very useful exercise. Low stakes scores aren't ever sent to universities. It's just primarily to pinpoint how you're tracking, right, in preparation for, being successful as a college student and preparing yourself for success on the SAT as well. So again, the PSAT for international students, solely administered, paper, pencil, in person. We have administrations in the fall. There's a big testing window as well for PSAT 8th grade, 9th grade, and 10th grade from February through to the end of April. So again, just inquire into your school, the coordinator, your teacher, whether or not your school administers the PSAT. And if so, I would encourage you to take advantage of that opportunity. My daughter, yeah, she did quite well on the PSAT. We think that is a harbinger of how she might perform in the SAT when she takes it in March for the first time of next year. So she's a junior, takes the October PSAT, gets the results in December, learns from those results, pinpoints where she needs to address some areas of weakness, and that hopefully will prepare her for being confident and comfortable for taking the SAT in March of 2022. So if you don't have a College Board account, you need to create one. That is first and foremost for any student. That is the first step towards, of course, taking the SAT or exploring careers or various other resources, features on collegeboard.org. Students need to have an account. What's also important is that account gives you access to Khan Academy, which is the practice, if you will, from the College Board. It is at no cost to students. There are interactive problems through Khan Academy. There are video lessons. There are full-length practice tests. None of this you have to pay for. In fact, I would encourage you not to pay for test prep. Personalized study plans based on your performance on those full-length practice tests. There's feedback from the College Board. There's that loop as well for educators. There are instructional resources, lesson plans, different guides that we can provide as well. So those are some of the tools, some of the resources available from the College Board. We obviously don't charge for any of this, and we hope that they're effective and practical tools for helping students on the SAT suite. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing that. So students,
Sure.
please do take advantage of those free resources that are available. And thank you, Maria Luisa. She has shared the links in the chat, so you can use the khanacademy.org link to access those resources. Now, let's see. Andy, since we're talking about test prep, and I know you would have scored a really, really high score in the exam, how did you prepare for the exam? Do you mind sharing?
Yeah, sure. Okay, so I might be like the millionth person saying this, but practice is really important for the SAT, basically because it's like such a unique exam and we are not used to having this type of exams, right, in high school. So practice is really essential for this type of exams. I started taking like a SAT prep course, right, just to learn more about the techniques, because there are like million techniques also on how you can approach the SAT questions. So it's also kind of a process of learning how can you improve, right, which technique work for you the best. And I mean, like, okay, I might be failing this side of math, so I might need to work more on this side, or maybe reading is not my best. So it's like a process in which you need to know in which sections you need to work. Beyond the SAT prep course, I believe the official material from College Board is such a great resource because you get like that idea of how the SAT is portrayed, right? So like the length also, I recommend you to take the SAT for 3 hours long, like time yourself, even put a mask on to get like accustomed to how the SAT is currently being taken, right? So get yourself used to taking this type of exams. And also Khan Academy is also a great resource. You can even write down when are you going to take the SAT, and Khan Academy gives you a study plan. So you should work every Saturday 2 hours if you want to get a high score, things like that. And there are many, many resources. So I surely recommend you to take advantage of them.
Great, thank you, Andy. And that was such a smart tip in terms of practicing with a mask, because a lot of times students now, well, at least I've seen it happen here in Trinidad and Tobago, they've been at home, so they haven't been wearing the mask, and then they had to go out to do exams, and you heard a lot of complaints about having to sit there wearing the mask. But practicing wearing your mask, it helps so that you're used to the settings that you'll be under when the exam actually takes place. But you've heard it from Andy: practice, practice, practice. Take use of all of the free resources that you could get from the College Board. What resources might be available at your Education USA Advising Center. Do as much practice as possible, and it's going to put you in the best position to get the best score that you can get. So I'll go back to you again, Paul. And we touched on it a bit in terms of the test optional and how SAT fits in. A lot of institutions now are moving towards test optional on a more permanent basis. So how does the College Board see the SAT fitting into college admissions in the future?
Great question. Before I answer that question, I just want to say for the record that I have not paid Andy for those words of wisdom about practice, practice, practice. Couldn't agree more. And then the resources that we have available at no cost. Certainly EducationUSA is an amazing resource as well. And going back to Andy's good point, and I think Maria, you touched on this as well, do your homework, not just in terms of practicing for the examination on that Saturday morning for 3 hours plus the breaks, wearing a mask. Got to think about these sorts of things. But also, giving thought to, again, the environment itself, and just making sure that you're very comfortable and aware, and get that good night's sleep the night before, which I know with teenagers might be a tall ask, but something you do want to take with all seriousness as well. But anyway, with respect to again with SAT, with college admissions, in the United States, right, it's all about holistic review, holistic admissions practices. And so, and certainly that is particularly important in the midst of a pandemic, right? So test optional admission, the SAT, we've always said, should never be used alone, right, to make or break a student's chances of getting into a university, because that does not pair, that does not align with the holistic review process of American higher education. Similarly, students should never be penalized or evaluated differently from their peers who do send SAT scores and those students who do not send SAT scores. So I think that's really important as well, and that's been a consistent message from the College Board to higher education, that the holistic review is, the admissions, standardized admissions test is but one critical component of this process. But we are never to penalize students who don't submit scores, with the recognition that the testing centers may not be available for at this particular time. So we understand all of that, the College Board. Certainly we've been dealing with test center closures. We've been dealing with reduced capacity. Most colleges aren't requiring a test score for the upcoming admissions cycle. That's really important. I think Andy and Maria as well, again, you mentioned this, do your homework in terms of test optional. I can't tell you just how many universities now have gone test optional. You just need to most importantly identify those universities that you're thinking of applying to and what their admissions practices are. If you go to a website from Inside or Inside Higher Education, they'll give you varying numbers in terms of the universities in alphabetical order that have gone test optional or test blind, right? None of that really matters much. What matters is the universities that you're interested in. What are their policies with respect to testing for when it is that you will graduate from high school? And I think that's what's most important. So certainly they're more flexible. There's more choice going into the admissions process as well. Some students may decide their application is stronger without a score, perfectly fine. And that's going to be true and certainly recognized by American higher education as well. So the short answer, again, do your homework. It varies greatly in terms of these test optional practices. I will say that, universities, if you were to ask them, what does the future hold? Are you going to be permanently moving to test optional? You will find online, and this isn't coming from the College Board. In preparation for today, I wanted to see what the current discourse was in terms of test optional. But what I left with was that most schools, most universities aren't committing one way or the other to continue their test optional policies once we get out of this pandemic, right? So, might we see a change in policies and practices from universities? Likely, but I think, again, you just want to do due diligence like my daughter is doing and just saying, okay, the 5 or 7 schools that she's particularly interested in right now that offer programs, degree programs that align with her interests, with her skills, that's where she needs to focus her attention, focus her energy. And so I would encourage you to do the same as well. Yeah, thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Paul. And you touched on a point there that I think we forgot to highlight, is that across the board, there are so many colleges and universities in the US. And although there are some similarities in terms of the admission requirements, it's really about the individual schools that you are interested in and understanding that there would be differences. Each college would have its unique requirements. There are some things that might be similar with some of them and some things that might be different. So it's really about the student having that idea of these schools that you are interested in and just continuing to be abreast of what their requirements are and ensuring that you are prepared for that particular institution and what is needed in your admissions package. So with that, yes, sure.
One thing, while you were speaking, I remember one thing, and that is, the College Board does look to see where it is that students in this part of the world, the Caribbean and Latin America, South America, to which universities are they most likely to send their SAT scores. And so obviously geography, proximity to where they live, and degree programs, those universities that offer financial aid for international applicants, in particular those in Florida, for example, all go into consideration for families when thinking about universities to apply to. California, Texas, and Florida, big destinations for students in the Americas. In California, for example, the University of California system, which is the largest university system in the United States, they have stated that the suspension right now of requiring standardized test scores is a temporary move, right? So if you're thinking, which is a very likely destination for many students from your part of the world, like the California system, UC Davis, UC Berkeley, UC Sacramento, USC, UCLA, those universities, again, they've come out with and said that they're still reassessing, if you will, re-examining the permanence of these test optional policies, just to reinforce the importance of visiting college websites. I think they are the most important. The admissions pages of college websites are going to be the most critical resource for you for really understanding presently what their policies are. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you for adding that, Paul.
You bet.
So Maria Louisa, I did want you to talk a bit, because of course we're talking about test optional, but there are going to be some students who do have to do the SAT. Their college may have it as a requirement, regardless of what's happening right now. So in the preparation for admissions, at what point in time should a student do the SAT? What year in secondary school or high school should they consider doing the SAT?
Sure, yeah, that's a very important planning question. Before that, I wanted to emphasize within the planning, the conversation with your family or your caregivers about budget, because taking the SAT does have a cost. So you have to verify what is that cost in your country, in your town, or where you will more likely take it, and establish that as your plan as well. Maybe you need to do some proposal to your parents or caregivers about how you're gonna get that money, or work for it, or get creative. So that's very important to keep in mind. All right. Secondly, timeline depends on what your school year looks like in your country. Okay, if you have an American school year, the suggestion could be that, like Paul's daughter, you kind of try to get a sense of how you're doing with the PSAT or with mock SAT from the free resources you have, at least in your junior year, so the year before you graduate. Whatever that looks like in your country may look different than in the US educational system. For example, in Guatemala, our school year normally goes from January to October or November from the calendar year. So students currently, right now, October 2021, they're finishing their school year. All right, so I would advise a student to at least get a sense of how they're doing with the SAT, maybe before even they start to get ready. Okay, even before they start to do SAT prep, become familiar with it, just a diagnosis SAT, maybe in their October of their, this is hard to translate to American years, but at least the end of the school year of their second to last year. So when they're sophomores, not juniors, not seniors, when they're sophomores in Guatemalan high school, okay? So a student who's right now finishing their sophomore year of high school, I would be like, become familiar with it, let's see how you do. That way you have at least 2 years to get prepared and become confident and become, proficient in the SAT structure. Now, that may be a bit over ambitious, trying to prepare for 2 years, but I would like to emphasize and suggest to you, if you're a student, if you're a parent, that it's never too early to become familiar with the SAT and to, be confident and comfortable with it. So if you can start as early as the end of your sophomore year or the beginning of your junior year, so second to last year before you graduate, that would be ideal. Now, taking it officially, maybe you want to take it in your junior year, so the second to last year, to see how you do. See your weaknesses, see if you need to retake it. And again, create an action plan. If you need to retake it, that is an option. So you would have to plan, and the latest that you should take it would be fall of your senior year of high school. So it would be the last trimester before you would like to, before the calendar year changes. So right now, the last date was October 1st, say October 1st, 2021. If I'm trying to study, start my college in the US in September 2022, that would be the latest I should have taken it, because then if I didn't do well, I can still have the last date in December 2021 to take it again. Okay, so that would be pushing it to the boundaries. Ideally, you want to move a bit earlier in the year. Still 2021, I would want to take it maybe March of 2021 to see that I did really well and still have 2 extra dates in my application year to retake it if I can and if I feel like it. Okay, I think that was a bit, I don't know if that was a bit confusing, but the conclusion is start prepping as soon as you can, as soon as you're able to. Optimize those free resources, all right? And take your test on official full SAT, maybe one of the free resources on the year, in the year before you graduate, all right? And then take an official SAT with your mask on, hopefully not anymore soon, in a testing center for your application process in the first quarter of the calendar year before you want to start your studies in the US. So that would be March maybe of the year prior to the year you want to start your studies in the US.
Great. I think that was clear. You explained it really well. So students, again, one good piece of advice there that really stood out to me is that it's never too early to start the preparation process. But again, in terms of tying down specific times, you would want to do the official SAT in the first quarter of that year, just before the year that you plan to start college in the United States. Okay. All right. So in terms of doing the exam, so we've talked about when is the best time to do it. We've talked about test prep and what might be available. We just have about 10 more minutes left. So I just wanted, Andy, for you to give us a bit in terms of if you faced any challenges when you were going to do the exam, how did you overcome that? And then when we've touched on that, Andy, I'd go into the Q&A if we've gotten any questions from the audience.
Okay. Taking or accessing the SAT, I think I didn't had any challenge itself. I would say maybe a challenge was getting accustomed to the SAT. To provide some context, right? I took the SAT 2 times, one in May this year, and the other one in August. And I saw like an improve of 90 points, I think so. And it was like a super increase of points. And I think that's basically because of maybe talking a bit of what Maria Luisa started talking about, like controlling your emotions when you take the SAT. Maybe it's the first time, right? So you might be really nervous taking an exam you have never heard before. But after taking the exam one time, you now know how it is going to be administered, what are some things that are going to do once you get to your test center, right? And I think that's one of the main things or like the advantages of retaking at least the SAT one time, because you get less anxious or less stressed while taking the exam.
Great, thanks so much, Andy. I think that that is very helpful for our students. So guys, as Andy stated, retaking the test in his case did lead to a higher score, and of course it did lead to less nerves. So again, it's all about that preparation. So I'm going to go into the Q&A. We did get a few questions that came in. So I'll start firstly, a question from Ria Patel. Hello, Ria, and thanks for joining us today. So her question is, can non-American citizens give or do the SAT in the United States? I live near the border and there's a test center near me. So maybe Maria Luisa, you might be able to take this question. Is this something that you've seen?
I would not be able to answer that. Maybe Paul can.
Test centers are available to students in the US, students international. I mean, it really is about students finding the most convenient test center available to them. So coming to the United States to cross the border to take the SAT, as long as they're crossing legally, of course, and it's safe for them to do so, then certainly. There may be some other requirements. Do keep in mind that it is the testing center that determines the health and safety protocols that allow for students to enter into the test center. So you just want to be very mindful of that. CollegeBoard has released a poster for all test centers in the US and around the world of sort of these, critical principle foundational rules around testing, right? Keeping distance, wearing a mask, making sure that you can attest to the fact that you've not exhibited symptoms in the last couple of weeks. So again, it's just a new world in which we live in. So you have to take these things into account when you sign up. But again, go online. If you're looking for a test center, as I mentioned, help me find a test center. I think that is actually the name of it. And that function will allow you to conduct a sort of a search, automated search.
Okay, and we also had another question from Ria. Paul, I believe this one would be for you as well. What are subject tests and why would you take them?
Good question. SAT subject tests were canceled, or they're no longer available for international students in June of this year. For US students, the decision that we announced in January meant that there would be no subject tests available to American students immediately. And the reason for us doing that is because subject tests have had a long history of providing value to students and helping them demonstrate to universities subject level mastery in a variety of different subjects. Helps universities place students, based on their performance on a subject examination. They've been used for awarding scholarships in the case of English, looking at English proficiency of applicants. But there are no longer SAT subject tests, in part because advanced placement has grown significantly. It's a curriculum program from the College Board, widely recognized by universities. We feel that's a better way for students to provide evidence of subject level mastery, and they're available in 38 different subjects. And to be honest as well, it's also an attempt to minimize the strain on students trying to navigate all these various assessments, that if we're in a position to eliminate one of them from the equation, then that's what we will do. And that was one of the reasons for eliminating SAT subject tests as well. So no longer worry about SAT subject tests. Universities will not be using them for purposes of placement, for scholarship, or for admission.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And this question is also for you. It came from Andrea. She has asked, can schools in the Caribbean apply to administer the PSAT?
Absolutely, yeah. So to administer our assessments, so the PSAT and advanced placement are administered at schools. Unlike an SAT exam that is administered at an SAT testing center, which could be a school or a university or an organization. But to administer the PSAT, all schools first have to apply for what's referred to as a secondary school code. And then there's level 2, which allows for schools to administer College Board assessments. And I'm going to put in the chat the link to finding that application for schools. Complete the application, you get a response back in about 14 days. You get a unique 6-digit code, and that 6-digit code is what the students would use when completing their answer sheet that allows for the ordering of examinations, the administration of examinations, and then the scoring of those exams, which you would get back in about 6 or 7 weeks' time. But absolutely, that is an opportunity we'd love to see more schools take advantage of in the Caribbean and in Latin America as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Paul. Okay, so let me just check the Q&A again. I think there were a couple more questions. Okay, so this one would be for you, Maria Luisa, I believe. If taking the SAT more than once to improve your scores, could you explain the process of utilizing the best score from each subject area? Is this available for international students?
All right, so I think we should get to the point of analyzing your scores. When you take an SAT exam, you will get division of how you did in the different parts. And this would in turn suggest your weak spots or the places where you can become stronger. Say, for example, in the language part, perhaps you need more efficiency in comprehension, or in vocabulary part, you need to expand your vocabulary so that it's better. And so when you take it, you'll be able to discern and kind of determine the spots where you would need to become better. And therefore, for example, if you're using Khan Academy, you would get more exercises and more practice on these areas so that you can become better. Now, when to decide which score to send is after if you're going to take it twice, you will wait to send your scores and input your school codes until you get your second score to then send them, because otherwise you would need to kind of update that score that you will send to the schools you're applying to have the highest score sent to them, right? So that it can strengthen your application.
Thank you so much, Maria Luisa. Okay, so I think, yes, so we have come to the end of our time in terms of questions. I just want to say thank you so much for my panelists. I think that your contributions today were invaluable, and I feel as though our students who have joined are a lot more prepared in terms of what to expect with the SAT and how it fits into the admissions process. So again, thanks for the time that you've spent with us today. For those of you joining us, again, I would just like to reiterate that if you had questions that we did not get to today, you can go to the Education USA website, educationusa.state.gov, where you could find a test center near you and reach out to an Education USA advisor who should be able to answer your questions. So thank you everyone for joining us, and please do enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you ever so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.